16-year-olds present themselves on the internet.
We had girls that dressed up as Playboy Bunny online. We had girls who were calling themselves slut and whore. There seemed to be some kind of kudos around sexual performance. A lot of the times, the way they were representing themselves was positioned as like a joke or fun. But then when you started looking at their stories in depth, they still had a lot of concerns over their body image. They had a lot of issues to do with worries over boys, dating. It seemed like there was still a lot of power inequalities. And it seemed also that there was a lot of power plays between the girls. Now, this is actually one of the key paradoxes. Why are girls so centrally concerned with sexual competition if we're living in an equal, gender-free world? Why is this such a consuming part of their identity? Because girls did feel quite keenly that there were pressures on them to perform online, like putting themselves up in their bras or knickers, as one girl said, or their bikini. Now, I'm 39 years old. These are the kinds of pressures that I didn't have to try and navigate when I was a young person. These are whole new sets of pressures.
You say you're 39, I'm 37, we're the same generation. Do you think this is something that we can, to an extent, lay at the door of older feminists who campaigned for sexual freedom, for sexual liberation, possibly without defining exactly what form that should take? And now we're faced with a younger generation who seem to us to be so sexually liberated that they're bordering on oppressing themselves sexually.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think that the language of sexual liberation has kind of been appropriated. What gets packaged as sexual liberation is this almost compulsory, like, I will do sex, I will perform as sexy, I will be sexy. I'm not trying to make a value judgment on that, but I'm trying to say that if girls are still, if their beauty capital and their erotic capital is still so important, have we reached a stage where we've got full gender equality?
Of course, boys and men also compete for a mate, as Dr. Ringrose concedes, but she points to the extreme pressures put on girls by what's come to be known as the pornification of society. You only have to look at men's magazines to see it, all nipples and G-strings, and now sold at eye level in the newsagents. One ran a competition for readers to win breast enlargements for their girlfriends. Dr. Ringrose's research discovered the impact it's having.
The girls were very, very explicit about sexually pleasing boys and men, but they seem to lack a lot of confidence or knowledge about sexually pleasing themselves. So one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is, like, we need to have some place for girls' pleasure and desire within sex education curriculum, for example. Now, that's kind of seen as quite controversial, but I would push very, very strongly for getting away from the just kind of disease and parts and plumbing curriculum. We can look at it in media studies. We can look at it in English or history. Talking about sexual decision-making, pleasure. Is there sort of this kind of imperative coming from the normalization of pornography, from lads magazines, and from Cosmo, Please Your Man?
Can you imagine selling that to parents? You know, we're going to teach your teenage girls about sexual pleasure.
I think obviously age is a sensitive issue here, but these kinds of issues are on the forefront of young people's minds anyway.
It's hard to see the syllabus changing anytime soon to educate young women in how to get more out of sex. Second-wave feminists like Anne Phillips from the LSE wonder whether that's what they were fighting for.
I'm surprised that there isn't more agitation among younger feminists about what seems to me the reinforcement of very strict codes of femininity and masculinity. If you look at kind of what goes on among younger people, there's actually a reinforcement of some quite rigid gender scripts. They'd loosened up and there'd been a lot of challenge to them. For me, very much the ultimate aim is precisely a society in which we're kind of freed from the weight and the burden of having to play out being female or play out being male.
That seems more of a pipe dream now than it has for some time. Looking back, the 80s and 90s seem blissfully androgynous compared with the invigorated sexism of contemporary culture. Dr. Sheila Lawler of Politeia believes feminism has undermined itself.
I suppose I would be much more sympathetic to the view that it's very important for girls to be able to fulfill themselves as full human beings from the earliest age, and anything in society which prevents them from doing that should be tackled. I would have been looking for the vote, yes, definitely, and I may even have gone with the demonstrators. I would have been looking for equal rights. I belong to a family where One member of the family who was a doctor would have had far lower pay than a man doing the same job and may not, because she was a married woman, have been appointed full-time. I would have wanted equal pay for equal work. And so all of these things, equality under the law is very important. But I think feminists of the more recent school have got it wrong when they think women should be treated separately, because that's put them into a ghetto.
Ghetto is a strong word, but let's revisit the evidence. Only 1 in 5 of our MPs are women, and just 1 in 10 of directors on the boards of FTSE 100 companies. Women still shoulder the burden of caring for the young and the old. They're 3 times more likely to work part-time than men, and 40 years after the Dagenham workers triggered the Equal Pay Act, the gap is still such that women effectively work November and December for no money. Sheila Lawler completes the grisly picture.
They're just eking out a living, getting the train, getting the bus to work, taking cleaning jobs, doing factory jobs, doing basic jobs, and rushing back to mind the family. And at every level of society, you find women doing a job who are overqualified. Every piece of research shows that. But above all, after the birth of each child, it takes 15 years to get back to the level of earnings that they had before the baby was born. And in fact, the studies show they never make up the pay gap. But even worse, they are not accruing pension rights, so they have a very poor old age to look forward to.
If a free market feminist, as we might call Dr. Lawler, is depressed, so too are the collectivist feminists at the other end of the spectrum. Professor Angela McRobbie of Goldsmiths College, London.
There is no contemporary feminism in mainstream political culture. It's almost unimaginable to think of a party leader saying, well, I'm very in favour of feminism. It may well be that certain kinds of feminism did have their day, but there really is also a place for respect for the memory of feminism and respect for the struggles that were fought. And there are many areas of contemporary political life which really require that memory to be reinstated.
The budget cuts and their disproportionate impact on women ought to be one of those areas. But can the sisterhood, fragmented by individualism and demoralised by pornification, be rejuvenated?
One always has to be hopeful about the possibility of new feminist movements emerging. Whether or not this coincides with the budget cuts, with the cutbacks in the public sector, it's really hard to say. It's been so long since there has been a vocabulary of women organising by themselves. It's been so long since there's been anything like a women's group set up to support cuts in the community. I'm a grandmother, so I would be very in favour of feminist grandmothers for community care and nursery provision. I've even thought of setting up such a group, actually.
Maybe that's what it'll take, feminists of Professor McRobbie's generation to come out of activist retirement, dust off their banners and lead the younger generation out of internet forums and into the mainstream. Maybe we could even burn some Wonder Bras in celebration.